Hello, my name is Samuel Ross, and I'm applying for the Open AI Builder position at InMarket. I would like to begin by thanking you for your consideration, and with that, we can go ahead and get started. Today, I will be using Cursor as my IDE. I've already gone ahead and set up the scaffolding for this project. We have one root level package JSON and one package lock. We have root level node modules, and in each one of our folders, we have a separate package.json. In our root level package JSON, we define the different workspaces of our front end, our LangChain agent server, our MCP wrapper, and then in those different folders, we have the modules that those folders will actually use. We have in our LangChain agent folder, LangChain Anthropic, LangChain Core, .env, LangChain, and Zod. In our MCP wrapper, we have our MCP SDK and Zod. And in our front end, we are using Vite. I've set up my environmental file with our Anthropic API key and our OpenRoute API key. I've put those in my git ignore the environmental file and the node modules as well as the dist. And I have set up some guardrails under rules for Cursor. These are basic guardrails that are implemented over the whole project, not to edit the env file, to use .env for environmental management, etc. We can go over those as the agents are working. I've also set up two sub-agents, one that specializes in front-end development and one that specializes in back-end development. I have also implemented two skill packages. I have downloaded the LangChain skills from their GitHub, and I have uploaded the front-end design skills from Anthropic. So we can go ahead and get started here. I've written one prompt. We are building an agent-driven application. This agent should use our Anthropic API key and OpenRoute key stored in our environmental file to access our LLM. The purpose of this application will be a browser-based road trip planning app that allows the users to plan multi-city trips. The user should be able to select which cities they would like to go to. We should then use our OpenRoute API endpoint to plan their trip. We will use the Matrix endpoint to plan their route. We should organize their cities in the most efficient route and predict the time of travel. We will be using LangChain to build our agent, and we will create an MCP server to use the tools our LangChain agent will create. We should maybe change that to own. Context and constraints. This app will be using our OpenRouteService API endpoint as our API endpoint. This API endpoint gets a location of cities and distance between them using longitude and latitude. We should have a simple input where the user inputs their desired city. We should create a simple UI interface that displays the cities in the most efficient travel order. Our tech stack is made up of Vite, .env, LangChain, Zod, and this app should be written in TypeScript. We have three separate folders, one for our front-end app, one for our AI agent made with LangChain, and one for our MCP server wrapper. We will work on each folder as an individual step. Set up the LangChain agent first, then the MCP server wrapper, then build the front end. Do not try to accomplish all steps in one pass. Our LangChain agent should have tools get cities, organize cities, and make route. This get cities tool will get cities on the route. The organize cities tool should organize the cities by distance, and the make route tool will return the most efficient route with total travel time. Our LangChain agent should be the only server making API calls, aside from the call from the front end to the agent itself. The LangChain agent should communicate with the MCP wrapper, and the front end should communicate with the LangChain agent. Requirements. Keep our LangChain agent and MCP wrapper as simple as possible. MPC server, Keep our LangChain prompt short but efficient to save on token uses. Keep behavior deterministic and offline safe. Keep each step modular and scalable. After each step, stop and explain the step via our deliverables, then ask permission to proceed to the next step. Add focus tests for TypeScript errors, connection errors. Implementation notes. Use our backend sub-agent for our LangChain and MCP wrapper work. Use our front-end sub-agent for all front-end work. We must properly manage our API calls, no repetitive calls. We must keep the front-end UI simple and clean. Break this plan up into multiple steps. Use skills as needed. For LangChain agent, use the LangChain fundamentals. For front-end, use the front-end design skills. Deliverables, summary of file chains, README for the entire project, explain the overall architecture, how to run the project locally, Our README should include clear instructions on how to set up the environment, obtain necessary API keys, start the MCP server, and run the web application. Test results. We will begin with the LangChain agent step. I will be using the Opus 4.6 model through Cursor. I have found that the Cursor auto model has declined in quality recently, so I will be using the Opus connection to complete our technical tasks. While it is working on this, we can go over our rules and our agents, our sub-agents. So our npm workspace rules just describes our node package layout. It says that the repo uses npm workspaces, which I did mention. Never install npm install into subfolders. We don't want to duplicate that node modules folders to avoid errors between versions. We want to keep one root level node modules folders. The other rule is keep front end and back end separate. So we want our front end agent to handle the UI and front end work, and we want our back end agent to handle the LangChain NCP environmental work. There should not be any environmental work in the front end, and all environmental work should be in the back end. Environmental secret works, we're going to use .env, as I mentioned, for environmental variables. We will never expose our API keys. We will never edit our env, our environmental file, because I've already done that myself. I usually tend to do that work myself. Dependencies, do not add any dependencies unless absolutely necessary. If a new dependency is added, explicitly list in the summary and explain the reasoning for adding it. As far as our agents goes, we just define their tasks a little bit with the sub-agent. We do have a front-end sub-agent and a back-end sub-agent. The front-end agent excels at UI, state management, back-end API integration. This should be only API connection. The front-end agent is using, the front-end file is using just to connect to our LangChain agent. We should never put environmental variables in the front end. There's no reason to. Never request API keys in the front end code, etc. The back end manages the environment, the .env, etc. And then, yes, it just gives some of the tasks it's supposed to do. Identify user-facing UI and its states. Make sure that's good. So we're specifying these agents to focus a little more. I think this is better than just using the auto agent, because then these agents know their purpose. If I was working on a bigger project, I would probably have these agents work in congruence and work together. But since it's a small project, I think our main agent can handle our initial prompt and delegate the work to the sub-agents. We can look at our backend agent, which says similar stuff. It manages the LangChain architecture, the MCP server wrapper. The AI calls the environmental secrets. We ask our agent to define what runs in the backend, define the API architecture. This is all going to be handled by our backend sub-agent here. Generally, if I was working on a bigger project, I would use a planning step for that first prompt, but because this is a short project and we have a short time, I just decided to let the agent go ahead and start working, which I think will be appropriate here. It's not a super complicated project. We're only defining 3 tools for our agent, and there should only be 1 tool used by the MCP wrapper, so it's not a super complicated project. That is why I did elect to skip the planning phase and go ahead and jump right in. As far as everything else goes, we are using the OpenRouteService API endpoint, which does get our distance and plans our route for us using longitude and latitude. I imagine for this project, the agent will choose to hard code some longitude and latitude for cities. If it was a bigger project, then I would probably add a translation layer that takes the natural language of cities and gets the longitude and latitude directly. Because it's just a small product demo, I don't think that's necessary for this stage. We also, as I mentioned, imported those few skills. We do have the front end design here and the LangChain skills in our cursor, so those should be used. as we work. Here's our front end design skill that was imported from Anthropic, so that should work well here. And then we also have that LangChain skill package, which has several LangChain skills, but I imagine the only LangChain skill we will use will be that LangChain fundamental skill. As far as hosting this product in production, I would probably host the front end on Vercel or something similar. Vercel does natively take Vite packages, so that is a low barrier to entry. I would probably host the back end for something simple like this on Railway. I would handle all the environmental variables on Railway. I would probably configure a custom URL using the DNS configuration to expose an input easy to access API endpoint for our front end to communicate with our agent. But yes, I'd probably break it up into two. I'd probably host the front end on Vercel, host the back end on Railway, as I mentioned. If I was doing this different ways, I might have these as individual running folders with their own node modules if it was going to be a complicated project. But for something simple like this, I do think it makes sense to have the one root layer package JSON, the one root layer package lock JSON, and the node modules on the root layer with the different workspaces for front end, back end, and MCP wrapper. We did instruct in our prompt, we did instruct the deliverables to have automated testing. I think that's very important to save time and effort on manual sanity checks. If the LLM you're using or the IDE you're using does execute these tests while it's working, that does save a lot of time on the manual sanity checks that you need to do yourself. So I think that's important. Because we single prompted it and did not go into planning mode, we might have a few production errors, but I do think they will be easily resolved. So now our cursor agent, our Opus agent, is going to be reading through our files. If I was working on a bigger project, I would probably create a skill, an implementation skill for this specific project that breaks down the architecture and important files, so our agent could use that skill and know what to edit and how it's structured. But because this is a small project, I don't think that's necessary to create that separate skill. But yeah, as we continue, we can see what our agent builds here. I do think this will be a fairly simple product. It is saying that it is going to use Sonnet 4, which I do think is an appropriate model for this type of project. Again, if I was going to work on something more technical, if I was going to have our agent write code or do any sort of technical task, I would probably use Opus. But because this should just be information organization, I think Sonnet should be appropriate. Opus is obviously the more expensive model, and Sonnet should be able to handle tasks like this. Okay, great. I generally do use Claude Code instead of Cursor. I have found that the Cursor auto model seems to have gone down in quality. It's almost as if they lobotomized it. So yes, I do generally use Claude Code, but I'm also very familiar with Cursor and the Cursor setup. I do think these rules are appropriate for this project. If I was working on a bigger project, I would probably have some more well-defined rules that really kind of lay out some hard guardrails, but I'm not too worried about security here as we are using temporary API keys. If I did host this project on Railway, I would continue to rotate the API keys to make sure that the vulnerabilities are, if there are vulnerabilities, they are easily rectified. But as we continue, we can see what our Opus agent decides to do. Great. So now it's ready to write the actual configuration files, and we can continue there. Yes, it says that lazy init seems to be the cleanest. I agree with that. I think that we do need to lazily initialize our agent because we do not want our agent to initialize before it gets that API key. So I agree with that. Okay. Great. And now it's setting up our agent invocation. And it does say that it is going to wrap the tools with try-catch blocks, which is good for our human reading eyes. We will be able to easily decipher what errors are happening. Great, and it is building the city database here. As I imagined, it looks like it's going to hard code those values for longitude and latitude of some popular cities. Again, if this was a bigger project and something that was actually going to go to production, I would certainly include a translation layer that would take the natural language of the city and get the longitude and latitude itself so any city could be searched. But for this demo, I think this should be appropriate. And well, in the meantime, we can go over our backend subagent a little more. It is nothing super complicated, just defining the responsibilities of that backend agent, making sure that these two agents do not intersect with each other. They should not work on each other's work. In our prompt, we did specifically mention which agent to use for which task, so as long as our ID follows that, it should work appropriately. And we are using cores, which is going to be good for our browser-based app here. I do think it is good to include a lot of these guardrails and deliverable notes within the first prompt, so our agent knows what we want to see at the end of each step. That way we can easily monitor how the agent's working and keep up and make sure that it is not going off track or doing things that we did not want it to do. Great. So now we have our to-do plan. Which is first going to create our TypeScript configuration file, which is good. Then we're going to create our cities.ts file, which is going to be our city coordinate database, and we have that here. As I imagined, it did hard code these longitude and latitudes, which is fine for the demo, but in production, again, we would probably change that. And then we have our tools file, so let's go ahead and check that our agent is appropriately creating these tools in the way that we want. We did ask for 3 tools here, so we do have our get saves tool. Okay, great. And that looks okay. Okay, great. So yes, that's a simple tool, just getting this, looking up the cities and returning their coordinates, which is important for our overall structure. And then we can check our organized cities tool. Okay, we are using appropriate API call there for organized saves tool, which is where we use our API to get the distance. And so that is good there. And then we should have the organized save by shortest distance tool. Okay, so yes, our 3 tools do look appropriate. We have our make route tool, which I forgot about also. So all of these look pretty good, nothing too complicated. And then we do have this waiting period where we're going to call this after organized saves tool, which is the proper order. So we do like that. So we can go ahead and improve that file. Let's look up our agent. Should be pretty similar. I mean, it should be pretty simple here. Okay, our system prompt. That's easy. If I was making a production app, I would probably add some personality to the system prompt and say, you know, you are a travel planner, you are an adventure guide, something like that. And it looks like our first step is complete here. So that's good. But yes, if we just make sure that this is all good. Great. So that does look okay. We do have the recursion limit, which is good. And then let's check our index. Okay, so we are looking for a port in our environmental file, which we don't have, but if not, it's going to default to 3001, which is fine. I don't know if I would keep that on production level, but for a demo, that should be fine. And we can go ahead and keep that. Great. And we can go ahead and keep all. And let's scroll down, and it should. Okay, so we had all 11 passed, and then we are returning what we asked for. So it summarizes our file change, which is great. Okay, great. No new dependencies. It gives our architectural decisions, which we asked for during our deliverables, and then our test results, which is awesome. And then it stopped, and then asked, can it proceed to the next one? And then we can just say, yes, proceed to step 2. So that is looking good for step 1. All of our tests pass, and it is organized in the way that we want. Let's check our README to make sure that is looking good. Good. Our architecture does look how it should. Our LangChain agent is the only one making API calls besides the call from the front end to the agent itself, which would be in production. But as far as the actual API endpoints that are not ours, that does make sense. And then we do have our tools defined. Okay, we have a 0 to 1. We have a 0 to 1 starting of the server here. Okay, we need to give further instruction on how. Okay, no, we do have instruction on how to attain the API keys. So that should be simple for other developers to look at and go ahead and use. We do have our tech stack and our project structure defined. Great. It does say how to run the tests. If you'd like to just run the tests, that is good. So that does look pretty good for the README, as long as we keep updating it as we create these other folders. And as I mentioned, our MCP wrapper should be pretty simple. I imagine that there will be one MCP tool that uses all the agent tools together. If I was making a bigger project, I would probably have separate LangChain agents, maybe one that manages a Google Calendar and could upload your trip to your Google Calendar. I would then use the MCP wrapper to call the tools from those separate agents in one way. But for a simple project like this, I think this MCP wrapper should be fairly simple here. And then after this step, we will focus on the front end. We should be using that front end sub agent to complete the front end step. And we should be using that front end design skill, which is just so helpful in front end design If you don't use that skill, a lot of times the agent will just generate a simple HTML page. But if you do use that skill, it often does some stylistic choices, which really, really add to the final product. Great. So we have our to-dos for the second step here. Great. And that does make sense there that we are going to get our tools from our LangChain agent, which is what we want. Great. And now that our server is closed up, we can minimize that. And then we have our client, which again should be very simple. Again, it is asking for an agent URL out of our environmental file. We do not have that, but it is okay because if there's not one found, it is going to default to something that is appropriate. Okay, so it looks like it might be duplicating the tools here, which is not what we want. So I'm going to have to push back on that, I believe, because we do not want a copy of every single tool from our MCP server. We should organize those a little better. So I will have to make one additional pass here, but that should not be too big a deal as long as it doesn't edit it itself, but that should be fine. And it's running the test now, which is good. All the tests pass, and then it's updating the README. So it is completing these deliverables as we asked it to. I think I should do one more pass on this step here to kind of reduce those tools. I don't think we need, unless it did it itself here. Oh, no, yes, we do need to do one more pass here because we don't want to duplicate all of those tools here. And it's giving us our deliverables now. All the files changed, and great. Before it's explaining the architecture and reminding us that it did not break the guardrails, which is what we want. Explain the tests that were passed. Great. And then we're going to say before moving to step 3, let's revisit our MCP tools. We do not want to duplicate all the tools our LangChain agent has. Let's simplify this before moving to stage 3. So I imagine this will be a pretty simple pass. We don't need to duplicate all the tools. Yes, that is how we should do it. We should have the MCP wrapper having one tool instead of having the duplicate tools of our LangChain agent, because that does not make too much sense. So yes, we will make that slight correction and then we will continue to move forward. Yes, that's what we want. We want the MCP wrapper to drop a single plan route tool. That should be fine. And I will do one more correcting pass over this. As long as it does pass its test, I will make sure that everything looks fine, and we will continue. We can keep the file here. So yes, now we have one tool here. This is a lot simpler. This is what we're looking for. This is good. I like this a little better in terms of architecture. And then as long as it, yes, updates the README, which it appears like it is, that is great. We should be able to move to our third step here. And let's just, yes, great. That is what we like. Okay, awesome. And all our tests are still passing? Great. Let's proceed to step 3. Step 3. Great. And then we can check our README to make sure it's been updated. Okay, so it did update that. That is great. We can keep. And then we can also keep this, our client, which is very simple. That's what we want. We want a very simple MCP wrapper for this. If we were building a larger project and we did want multiple agents, this allows us to be a little more scalable. We could combine the different tools of those separate agents into calls from our MCP wrapper. So I do like the architecture of that a little more. And then our final step will simply be to do our front end UI. And if it works properly, and we do use that front end design skill, it should be excellent. Again, because we did not do a planning step, we might have a few runtime errors our first pass, but the way we build this, they should be easily debugged and correctable. We do have different options on cursor for debug or plan, but for a small demo like this, I think it should be fairly easy to debug, even if we do have some runtime errors. Great, and that looks good. Okay, great. Yes, okay, so this is what I mentioned earlier. It does mention that if you want to change the port, you can add an environmental variable to our env file and set that port directly, but they do have the defaults here. We do not have those variables quite yet, but in production, yeah, we'd probably go ahead and set those. Again, in production, I probably host the backend on Railway, and you can easily set environmental variables on Railway, so you don't actually have to include them in the repo at all, which is a good practice, I think. And yes, these test files where we run these tests, they are so important to automate testing because we do save a lot of time and effort by allowing our LLM to run the test instead of having to run manual sanity tests. I think that's very important for LLM development generally. So I always try to include that in my initial prompt. Also, if I was going to work on a bigger project, I might have separate prompts for the separate subagents. But because it's a small project and it needs to be a specific order that we wanted to make our LangChain agent first and our MCP wrapper, then the front end, I thought it was best to do a single prompt here. And our README, I will add on completion here, I will add a scalability step to the README. That way, if people want to add, it does explain how it works, but which developer could probably easily pick up and work on. But if someone wanted to add a separate agent or a separate tool, I would like to add a small README section that explains how to do that very clearly. I do like that it does say our tools within the README, which I think is important for other agents to understand. I mean, for other developers to understand. But yes, I like the README now, but I do think it could still be improved. So we're moving to our last step, which is our front end step. We have our to-do list, and we're going ahead and cranking out these files. We do have our TypeScript configuration file. We have our index. Our API should only call the actual agent. It should not do external API calls. So let's just make sure that that is. Okay, so this is actually isn't. Okay, so yes, that looks fine. And our style, as we use that front end design skill, which is crucial for stylistic choices. If you just let it have at it, it sometimes will just generate a pure index.html page without any stylistic choices, which looks rather bland and very basic. So I'm happy that we included that plugin to work here. And now we are writing our tests, and we should run those tests. And after that, we should be good to go here. Again, because we single prompted and we did not use planning stage, there might be a few runtime errors here, but that will be easily dealt with. Okay. Okay, great. And here's our main TypeScript file. We have some basic cities for handling the basic functions for handling the front end. And this all looks pretty okay here. And then all 19 tests pass across the 3 workspaces, so that is good. We did automate a lot of that testing, so we have completed the step 3. It is giving us our deliverables, but if we check our README, it should already contain that 0 to 1 start instructions. Okay, we might need to actually add one of these environmental variables because it looks like they're defaulting to the same port, but that is okay. Okay, great. We can keep this. So let's go ahead and try to run this. Again, we might have to do some changes there because those are defaulting to the same port. Okay. So we can go here. Okay, great. So that's running properly. And now let's do the same with our MCP wrapper. Okay, so that might not be running properly. But we can try, and then we might have to change that port directly. I might use 3002 there. This front end does look pretty good. Okay, now that was good. That enables Denver. Okay, let's see what happens. Again, we might have a runtime error here because we did single pass this, but hopefully not. Generally, if it takes long to load, that's a good sign, but okay, yes. Okay, great. So we do have that. Let's check our dev tools. No errors in the console there. And we can suggest a cursor that get error when planning route. Could this be because MCP wrapper and LangChain agent default to the same port. Be objective in your debugging analysis and fix this problem with as few edits as possible. Okay, so the issue is that it's returning an incorrect JSON format, which should be easily resolved here. In the meantime, we can end these on the different ports. I might go ahead and change that myself. Let's let cursor, and the port is not the cause. Okay, great. Okay, great. So actually we don't need a port for that. I was mistaken. Okay, that's the issue. Okay, so we need to convert it. We're missing a step there. One file change, that's good. Great, so let's start all of these one more time. We are running, and we are running. Okay, let's refresh here. Atlanta, nope. Oops, don't need all caps there. Atlanta, add, come to Austin to visit y'all. Go up to Dallas, add, and then go to Denver, add. Let's plan our route. There we go. Perfect. And this does look excellent. We do have our stops. We do have the distance between them. That does make sense in order. That is an optimized way to do it. It wouldn't make sense to go Atlanta to Denver back down, obviously. So this does make sense. And we are looking good here. Again, if I was to make a fully production ready app, I would probably add some different layers, some translation layers where you can not need to hard code those values. But for starters, this is pretty good. Again, thank you so much for considering me in your applicant search. I hope that I was able to show my skills today, and I hope that this does illustrate my knowledge of Cursor and LLM development in general. Thank you one more time for considering me, and I hope to speak to you soon. Have a good day. Bye.